Alrighty, everybody, it's that time again. We are heading into, yes, the buried life. Retired in Korea, racism in Korea. Does it affect me as a foreigner, and what have other people experienced? Yeah, that's what we're going to take a look at. I'm Steve, the retired hobby tech guy, and I'm enjoying a latte. Yeah. With that, I've got some messages about people asking about racism in Korea, and is it a thing? I've talked about it a little bit into the past, but then there's always the context of who you're talking to. So, while I said that there's a couple of stores that are close to the U.S. military bases that say no Koreans allowed, which is kind of strange, but the reasoning behind that, in case you're wondering, was that Koreans go into a store that's normally frequented by U.S. military personnel and their families and contractors, so on and so forth. They'll find that the prices are really high. Imagine that. Stores with higher prices around military bases. That's happened since military was invented. It is always that way. But the other things that we mentioned in Korea were that I had experienced a couple of times when I was younger, prior to being married, was that I would go to a club with a couple of Korean friends, and we were stopped at the door and said, nope, no foreigners allowed. And when I was younger, I would get kind of like mad for a little bit, but then it's like, this thought got into my head, well, if they don't want my money, I'll go somewhere else and give them my money there to get service. So, back then, even then, it wasn't such a big deal to me. And this also happened when a friend of mine, guy's name was Colette, if I remember correctly. He was a black guy, and we go out, and a couple other people, that we experienced this from time to time. I don't know, it's because I remember it happened to me because I was white. It definitely happened when me and him and some other guys were together, and we tried to go to a Korean club that wasn't a military focused, club. It was kind of way out far away from the military base. But, when you get stopped at the door and it's like, no foreigners, no English, no, just kind of go and they would point down the road or whatever. So it didn't really bother us because it's like, one, we want to go where we want to get served. We don't want to force the point of being served and have somebody give us a bad attitude, because that ruins the whole night. So in our minds, it was kind of like, you know what, we're not even going to stress over this. We're just going to go continue to have fun. We totally get it, shook their hands and left. So we didn't see this as a big deal to us, but that was way back in the day. I got to Korea in the 80s. That was probably 1989 or 1990. And then maybe another time in the 90s, just prior to getting married. It didn't really bother us. It was no big deal. And it should be noted that there are a lot of places nightclubs where you have to pay an upfront fee to get in, and that fee can be pretty big. You got to pay a lot of money to get into the club. Some of it's really, really expensive, and I had the opportunity to go to one of these. A Korean gentleman, I met when I was off post, and he's like, "Hey, he wanted to show me around, go drinking and whatever." He wanted to practice English. Obviously, he had a lot of money, because we went to one of these clubs, and not one of these clubs that denied me access, but he paid. He pulled out a wad of money about the size of my fist. And it was huge, and he paid. It was way too much money. But as soon as we got in there, what ended up happening is that all of a sudden this huge tray of food and huge, bottles of beer and soju and the whole 9 yards, and then there were, the hostesses and so on and so forth. It was just like. And I had heard stories back at the time in the military where people would try to go in, and then they wouldn't charge the fee up front, and then the Joes go in there and they eat and drink, and then they wouldn't pay their bill. So at least that's the story that was relayed to me many, many decades ago. And then eventually it kind of morphed into, we just don't serve foreigners because most of the foreigners are military personnel and they don't make a lot of money and they can't pay the bills. So, I kind of see that going on. The other thing I want to take a look at is this video that expatriates in South Korea accuses bars and nightclubs of racism and exclusion. Again, this is kind of interesting, so we're just going to kind of jump right into this, and this is kind of an interesting video, so pay attention.
We can't come in?
Yes.
Why?
Only correct.
Why?
No English.
Being turned away from a nightclub because of your clothes or because you've had too much to drink, that's nothing new. But in South Korea, you might also be refused entry because of where you come from, or even the color of your skin. This is what some expats have been sharing on TikTok in videos that they say reveal discrimination. We spoke to 5 other foreigners in South Korea who said they've had similar experiences. Kirsten Keels is a Black American student living in Seoul. She told us that this discrimination is even worse for people of color.
I went to a pretty popular club in Gangnam 2 years ago. There's a bouncer who looked at my friend who said, "Oh, there's like people in your group that can't come in." And the bouncer like leans forward and he meets eyes with me and he like looks me up and down. And he's like, "Dress code." It's pretty common to say like, "Oh, there are too many foreigners," or you can't come in, but then seeing white individuals in the club are being let in or let out.
No. You better not let her in. There's no way that you'll let her in and you won't let us in.
There's also clubs, you present your passport to them in order to check your drinking age or things like that. And they see, like, say you're from a North African country like Morocco. They won't let you in.
Kirsten told us that the places that might turn you away for your nationality are still in the minority. But because of Korea's tough defamation laws, it's difficult to speak out against them. Instead, she decided to create a list of places where foreigners can go without being discriminated against.
A lot of times it's on Black and brown foreigners to have the sixth sense to know that they're going to be discriminated against.
They're playing Black music and they're racist.
We created this list just to make it a bit easier for everyone involved, and also because we're tired of seeing our communities and multiple other communities harmed, and just recognizing that, like, we're here, we're not going anywhere, our culture is valued here, we are valued here, and discrimination and racism are not okay.
There is no law that prohibits discrimination in South Korea, whether it comes to nationality, ethnicity, gender, or sexual orientation.
Alrighty. Yeah, pretty interesting stuff, huh? So, yeah, a very interesting video talking about racism in Korea. And again, the context was, you got people going to the club, the young people. I can say that now that I'm almost 59 here. I'm a senior. I get the senior discounts, even though I don't look like a senior at times. But yeah, it ends up that I don't see this in restaurants. I don't see it in coffee shops. I don't see it in stores, and I've got, 12, 30, 40, I've got about 15 years in Korea altogether. And the only time that I've ever seen racism is at nightclubs, based on no foreigners allowed, and there's that. But then there's also agism, and there's places where there's clubs that say no people over 50 or 55. There were some articles about that a little while back talking about that. And what these clubs ended up having was a bunch of elderly people over 50 and over. I think it was 55 or over. No, I think it was 50 and over. And what they would end up doing is they'd go in these clubs, and probably not the clubs that 20 and 30 years olds go to, but maybe it was, I don't know. But it got to the point of where there are so many of these elderly people, and these elderly people were Koreans, that they drink and they get drunk, they act like a fool, and it had happened numerous times that eventually this place ended up putting a sign, no one over the age of 50, So it's kind of weird, because you can see one side where if you're acting the fool all the time and you're getting drunk and you're throwing stuff and causing problems and disrupting the business, which there is an actual rule or law for that, obstruction of business. It's a misdemeanor crime here in Korea. But it can get to the point of where I can understand from one side, from the business, is saying, hey, we got all these 50-plus-year-old people coming in here, getting drunk, acting stupid, don't know when to stop drinking, harassing the wait staff and so on and so forth, yelling and bothering the other people in the club, yeah, we're just going to make a sign and put up no people over 50. And for me personally, I don't really care. There will be another place to where they will take my money. I totally get that. Like I said, I've experienced it myself when I was in the military. But as far as as being a retiree, I don't go to clubs. That time of my life is gone. Clubs are too loud, they're too noisy. If I would go to a club, it would have to be something to where I would be able to speak and hear and listen to somebody else and not have the constant banging of music. So, yeah, if I want to get my head banging on, I'm going to do it in the gym when I'm lifting weights and, I got my earphones on and doing all that. But this brings to question, what do I checked up on the laws here in Korea, and there is actually, I think it's a Title 11 in the Korean Constitution that talks about that there's not supposed to be racism and so on and so forth. But obviously, after doing some digging and research, what I found is that those things aren't specifically a law as far as I'm going to take you to court because you're being racist. You're not allowing me into this nightclub, and like the video showed of the individual that was talking about, there's people that are, this place is racist and, they're playing music, black music, and yet they're racist and whatever. Yeah, apparently that does happen in Korea. But me as an independent, and I let the market decide that. I kind of see one side where it's like, no, that's not right. You should allow people in. But then on the other side, it's like, well, why would I want to frequent a place that has that type of attitude? The market will prevail. The market will correct itself. And, but then again, on the other side, it's kind of like, well, what do you have like in the United States? You have the Italian American clubs where if you're not Italian and you can't get into the club. Or what about, some veterans VFW places where you can't go in unless you're a veteran or the guest of a veteran? So there's this blur of rules and laws and ageism. And as we talked about before in a previous video, I've actually seen coffee shops since I've been here, retired here, where it says no children allowed. Yeah, children, verboten, none, 9, zip, 0. And some people, the interesting thing is that I'm close to Camp Humphreys, Korea. And so there's a lot of military families, dependents, kids, the whole 9 yards. And every once in a while, you'll see these posts on Facebook where these dependents, the wives, will complain about these coffee shops and say, well, we heard about this great coffee shop, but we got there and it said no children. That's racism and blah, blah, blah. Well, no, it's not racism, it's ageism. So let's just correct that right there. But the other thing is that I do appreciate that there are coffee shops that say no children, because there have been a number of times where we've been to coffee shops where some people have come into the coffee shop with their brood and their kids are unruly, they're yelling and screaming and throwing things, and you just wanted to sit back and you just wanted to have a nice discussion, you just wanted to have an adult conversation without rugrats around. And this is, we had our rugrat, that's the thing. There's times when adults want to be around other adults and don't want to be around children. I'm going to tell you, as a parent, that happens. And, you just need to get away from the crying and the screaming and, the Barney songs or, Baby Shark song, do thing. You want to have an adult conversation, and you want to do that without children because you deal with that every single day. So here in Korea, Korean coffee shops are places to where you can go. The music isn't so loud that you can't hear each other talk. It's more calm. It's more serene. The place might be crowded, but the whole thing is that with those type of coffee shops that don't allow children, it gives you a chance for an adult to be an adult, And if you've been around kids, if you've had kids, if you've been around kids and had other kids around with your kids in coffee shops or stores, you would appreciate having a place to go that doesn't allow kids. So on that side of the coin, I totally get that. But then there's other coffee shops that are kid focused. See, this is the other thing that these people don't talk about is, these dependents with their kids, and people come to Korea and they're like, oh, well, this cafe won't allow my kids in there. It says no kids and blah, blah, blah. How racist, and well, it's agism. But, that's wrong and blah, blah, blah. But then they totally don't even look for kid-centered coffee shops or cafes. And there's a number of those because a lot of people have children, and so what they'll have play areas for the kids, and then a little further away, you'll have places to where you can drink coffee. There are coffee shops that I've actually been to where they allow children on like the first floor, but the second and third floor they don't allow children. So yeah, multi-purpose. I totally get that. Ferrithus pops up and says, boom, hey Steve, is children all the way to 18? No, that's a good question. But in the context of what we're talking about, I'm probably thinking about 7, 8 years old and below, when the kids can be rowdy and unruly and so on and so forth. If you goof on Asian kids, it can be relaxing. They love funny faces and they quiet down. Yeah, that happens at times. And as far as the Asian kids, it is very rare to have Asian children running off at the mouth, running back and forth, throwing stuff, being loud, being noisy. And it's Korean children are very well behaved. Now there's always an exception to the rule, but usually, from what I've seen, probably about 99% of the time, is the Korean parent will read them the riot act and tell them to behave and so on and so forth, and boom, the problem is solved. It is very rare that you see that. So yeah, it's just kind of a thing. We got another comment here. Greetings, Steve. There seems to be racism everywhere you go these days. For example, the caste system in India, the most fascinating thing about it is it's all an illusion or non-abiding. Yeah, it's when you think about it, I mean, we all get to a place of where we all bleed, we all have hearts, we all have organs, we all have skin, albeit, some are different colors. Some people get out in the sun more than often, red, yellow, black, brown, whatever it is, white. We're all the same underneath. We have different cultural norms and we're raised differently at times, but really when it comes down to it, we're all people. And for the most part, I'd say even with those Korean clubs that didn't allow me in because I was a foreigner, it wasn't it wasn't kind of like, how can I put this? With that, well, I didn't feel that they were doing it because they were angry at me. It's the rule. It is what it is. Like I said, we went to a Korean club and they wouldn't let us in, but the guy, the bouncer, the guy at the front, pointed us down. He explained to the Korean guy that we're with, hey, we don't serve foreigners. This is, Korea only club, blah, blah, blah. And like I said, I was totally fine with it. And he wasn't mean. He wasn't demeaning. He wasn't like, get your dirty American butt out of here. We're better than you. No, it wasn't that. It's just, it is what it is. And then he pointed down the street and, there's a lot of other clubs that will serve foreigners and so on and so forth. So, in that, it just didn't bother me. Because like I said, I don't want to go to a place that, is going to make me feel bad. I don't want to force the issue. It's kind of like, since I came from Colorado, that's another interesting thing. Remember in the news in Colorado how it had that cake baker, the guy who baked cakes, professional cakes, and he had a strong religious belief, and according to his religious beliefs, he didn't believe in same-sex marriages. So this couple, same-sex couple, came into his bakery and they said, oh, we want a wedding cake and blah, 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 and they made a big deal that they were, same-sex marriage and so on and so forth. The owner goes, no, not doing it. It's, that's not what I believe in, and I don't, I'm not going to support that in any way, shape, or form. There's plenty of other stores or bakeries where you can get this done at. And then there was lawsuits were involved, the whole 9 yards. And I just found it weird that the whole thing, it's like, if somebody doesn't want to do something for you and you press the issue and you make it a thing, you put so much drama into this, why would you do that? I think their agenda, just kind of go on, I only got a few brain cells left, but I'm just thinking maybe it was part of an agenda, and it really wasn't about them getting married, but it was them making a point about, hey, you should serve, same-sex couples, and regardless, even though businesses have the right to refuse service for anybody, but then there's, the racism laws, but then it's not like the cake guy said, hey, he went out of his way to do this. He informed us, says, yeah, we just don't do that. That's not our thing. There's plenty of other bakeries. So there's one side and then there's the other. And then it's like, well, why, if you're a same-sex couple, why wouldn't you go to a same-sex couple bakery, or an LGBTQ bakery, or, whatever it is? Why wouldn't you want to put your money towards that type of bakery instead of making this a thing? But then on the other side of the coin, it's like, should you demand service? And if it really was for your wedding, would you want that negative energy and that experience of, I had to sue to get this guy to make our wedding cake? That would just put a damper, I think, on your wedding. It would be, if I was in that situation, well, it wouldn't happen. Let's say for some reason it did. If that situation happened to me, and it's like went in and the guy says, no, we don't do same-sex cakes or marriage cakes, wedding cakes, whatever, I would be like, oh, okay, well, all right. Do you know any that do? Or I would just leave and then Google to my heart's content to find LGBTQ bakeries and support them with my money. You see what I mean? It just doesn't make sense to me to press the issue. And the interesting thing is I tried during that time, to find out if these people ever got married. Couldn't find anything on that. So it was kind of like, and then it went to court, and then of course it was like, hey, he doesn't have to, it's religious belief, blah, blah, blah. It'd be kind of like saying, going into a Muslim restaurant or a Jewish restaurant and saying, hey, I want some pork ribs. I want a pulled pork sandwich. You don't have it. That's racist. Or you're discriminating against me because you're not making me a pulled pork sandwich. And then could be a Muslim, could be a Jewish guy, Orthodox with the whole thing. And it just doesn't make sense. Why would you force that on somebody that clearly does not operate that way, their business doesn't cater to those type of people? I just don't get it. It's just really, really weird. It's weird when you go through time, expense, and labor to press a lawsuit like that. Yeah. I mean, if it truly was about your wedding, and the wedding is supposed to be the happiest day of your life, aside from, kids being born or whatever, but if that's the happiest day of your life, why would you want to infect or have that bad memory or experience and the pain and the lawsuit of all of that for this guy just to be told, he's not going to make you a cake, and you can't make him that way, so go get your cake at a place that will accept your money and will gladly, I just don't get it. It sounds like ignorance to me. Yeah, it does. But then there's that fine line of, if you go back in our history, it wasn't too long ago that you had colored water fountains and white water fountains, colored bathrooms, white bathrooms, the whole thing. But thankfully, the civil rights and everything came about and struck a huge blow against that. In regards to not only bathrooms and food and restaurants and jobs and all of that stuff, I mean, really, we are all the same underneath. So, which is a very good thing. You shouldn't be able to. And what's interesting is in the United States is that you have laws on the books for gender, race, sex, ethnicity, so on and so forth. All of those things, like housing and blah, blah, blah. And what I found really interesting is when the LGBTQ whole thing came into play, is that they said, oh, this is against, and it's like, we can't get housing. And it's like, what? Wait a second now. What do you mean you can't get housing because people are discriminating against you for your sexual orientation and your gender and whatever? There's laws in housing that mention specifically that. And then the interesting thing that I found is that these people didn't buy a house. So, it just makes you wonder, are they really sincere? And I'm sure there are sincere people, and I'm sure that there are people that have outdated ideas and beliefs, but there needs to be some common sense involved. But when we talk about being in Korea and racism, how does it affect me as a retiree? And I said I have experienced that by going to a couple of clubs. But now, as a retiree, I haven't experienced it. Haven't. There's times where I've gotten on public transportation where I'm the foreigner, and, I've had it where I'm standing because, the older people and women and children are sitting and so on and so forth. I've had grandmas, Korean grandmas, sit. And it's like, no, grandma, I can't. I can't do that. No, you sit. And she's like, no. And she makes me sit. And those little Korean grandmas, man, they got some strength. They pull me down, they sit me down and all that stuff just so I could sit. So there's lots of examples of that. And then, of course, I got to take their bag and put it on my lap because I don't want them carrying the bag. There's this reciprocal, thank you. But then there's times where grandmas don't do that, where I've been sitting and see, an old grandma and she looks worn out, and it's like, hey, please sit, take a load off your feet, you've earned it. And it's just being polite. So, I've seen more and more of that. As far as the racism in Korea, for where we are now, we don't really experience that. We don't go to clubs. If you took the whole club thing out of the scenario, haven't experienced racism. So, yeah, it is. Veritha says, sexual orientation has not been a protected trait for a long time. This is very recent. Elsa says, if I hire someone, I cannot deny a job because of certain protected status, age, disability, race, sex, sexual orientation was not part of that for a very long time. Yeah, absolutely. I remember being in the military. There was my time in the military, what was I talking about? Oh yeah, before, don't ask, don't tell. I joined the military in 1985 when I was 17 years old, and I turned 18 when I was in basic training, joined with delayed entry program. But with that, there was people that were, gay or, whatever it was, whatever you want to call it back then, they were in the military. And for some strange reason, it's weird because people think that these people were not in the military, but they were. And it was kind of like, okay, well, I'm going to keep my distance. We're not going to go, spend time on the weekend at their place, obviously. But the whole thing was, it wasn't flaunted as their whole identity of being, this is me and I'm rainbow bright, whatever. That wasn't it. All of the gay people that worked for me in the military or that I worked with or under, no pun intended, it was about doing the job, getting the job done, work hard, play hard, and boom, and taking care of soldiers and doing what's right. So we knew that these people existed. They if you work hard and do your job, I could care less what your orientation is. I could care less where you came from, what your color was. We had a mission. You do the mission, then you get rewarded. And if you work hard, I'll bust my butt to get you a 4-day pass and get you some time off or whatever, or I'll even just have a barbecue at my house and we'll do it that way. So all types of people that had worked with me and for me, and the people that I worked with that were different orientations and different races, that they set the standard because the rule was work hard, you get rewarded. And that's it. It was just So when that whole thing about don't ask, don't tell, it was like, those of us that have been in the military and had common sense were like, I don't know why this is a big deal. They're already here, and if they're doing their job and they're doing it well, it hasn't been a problem. And at least the 20 years that I had in the military, the only time that there seemed to be problems is when people didn't want to do their job. But then that's for anybody. It doesn't matter the color of your skin, your sex, your race, your age, your orientation. If you didn't do your job, yeah, that's where problems come in. If you show up late to work and you can't make it to formation, that you don't put in the time and energy to take and maintain your physical fitness standards to pass the PT test, the physical fitness test, yeah, then there's going to be a problem. If you eat so much that you can't fit into your uniform, and when you push your stomach out, buttons pop out like shrapnel from a Claymore mine, yeah, there's going to be some problems. More often than not, I would see people that would say, oh, well, you're picking on me because of my orientation. You're picking on me because of my race or whatever. It's like, no, this has nothing to do with it. If you can't do 2 miles in X amount of minutes, that's what we're talking about. If you're eating so much that you're on the verge of having to wear pregnant army fatigues, yeah, there's something wrong with that. If you can't pass the height and weight test and the tape test, for being overweight and obese, rules are the rules, and that's what we're dealing with. I don't care what you do, and what you do after work or before work or whatever it is. That's what we're dealing with. We're dealing with facts. So at least that's my experience anyway. CB says, I have seen signs in Japan say no English spoken here, but that is kind of rare. Yeah. Let's see, what else do we got in here? Ferrithus says, it's all coming back now. Under Trump, they're dismissing thousands of troops because of their gender identity and sexual orientation. It's a very concerning time. That's very interesting. Yes. I didn't know we'd go into this. It's interesting because I know some people that are doctors in the military, and the people that are going through gender transition, trying to get the surgeries and stuff like that, and they're on the medications, they're on the hormones, whatever stage that they're on, those people are non-deployable. That means they can't go to war if a war breaks out. There's many times where I've talked to doctors who have supposedly treated these people that said, well, hey, they're on so many medications that they can't even go to field training exercises. So you're not deployable, and or you're not able to go to field training exercises. And with some of these transitions, they will never get off of the medications. They will always need medical care. And if you look at what is involved with somebody who goes under the knife for their transition on both fronts, yeah, it is just absolutely insane. There's no way that somebody like that could be deployed. And so they're more often than not, they're put in an undeployable status. So does it really make sense to have somebody in the military whose main job is to be deployable to not be deployable? And, then there's the cases of people that are like, hey, well, I can't get my gender affirming surgery on the outside because I don't make enough money because it's not a requirement or whatever it is. It's not deemed necessary. That specifically pointed out that joining the military, you can get that, but then you're non-deployable. So in other words, the only reason that they joined the military was to get that gender affirming surgery. And then you're non-deployable. It's kind of seems disingenuous. It seems self-serving. And especially in the military. The military's job is to be deployable. You can't be too fat. You have to meet certain physical fitness standards. You have to, be medically deployable. So that's kind of the main things there. So again, it's kind of like, if you can't be deployed in any way, shape, or form, or whether you're on the front lines or you're the support personnel that you can't be deployed, I just don't get that. So it's, it's kind of like saying, somebody works on an oil rig, and if you've ever done work on an oil rig and you've seen some videos of that, that seems like some derrick work and all of that. That is some insanely physical work. So if you've got somebody who's physically disabled, should they be able to sue the oil rig for not allowing them because they're disabled, despite the fact that they can't do the physical labor that is, needed to do that job? There's some crazy stuff. So, part of me, as far as the military is concerned, and I'm old school military, is that if you are non-deployable, you're not an asset because everything is geared towards being deployable. So when you are a person in the military, you are filling a slot that is essentially a slot that will be deployed. Every unit can be deployed. Every job can be deployed. So everybody can be infantry, but most likely you're going to be a support personnel, but you can still deploy and go to overseas assignments or deployments, so on and so forth. I spent 12 years overseas. Been there, done that. When you have people that cannot be deployed, you become that becomes a liability for that unit, and they are less combat effective because now they've just got a body that can't do anything. So, that's kind of weird. Let's see. Oh, we got a bunch of other comments here. Let's catch up. It says, karma or Ari plays a pivotal role in what you're describing. Undoubtedly, things will eventually attain equilibrium within the cyclical pattern of universal transformation. Wow, that's deep. But everything will balance itself out, basically. Ferthus says, I'm all with you. If you can do your duties, go right ahead. Absolutely. If you can do your job and you can be deployable, I have no problem with, at my time in the military, I had no problem with what you look like, what you did before and after work, or, the religion. That's the other thing. It's kind of like, I've worked with Jews, Satanists, pagans, and everything in between. It has been amazing. And some of these people, and Muslims included, that people that just wouldn't get along, you would think, Satanists and die-hard Christian, would not get along, and they would be butting heads all the time, or a pagan that comes into the mix, or a Wiccan who, cast spells and, whatever that. I've had these people work for me in the military, never had any problems, because it was mission first. It was do the job, mission first, and then you'll get rewarded for doing a good job. That's what it was. But then also, what I would do as a leader is that when I would get a new soldier in, and I would say, hey, here's the deal, mission first, work hard, play hard, you'll get rewarded, we'll try to get you promoted, I want you to be the best person that you can be, I want you to take care of your family, I want you to be the best soldier, I want you to attain rank, and I want you to ring that retirement bell and say, hey, this was worth the ride, even though it sucked a lot of times. But with that comes a little bit of parenting in the fact that, hey, says here, and I would ask straight up questions. I say, is there anything that you believe, as far as religion or stuff like that you're really, die hard on? And, I guess now you can't ask those questions, but back then you could. And then I had people say, well, I'm a pagan, I'm this or that, I'm a Satanist, I'm Christian, I'm whatever. I believe in the ganja spaghetti monster in the sky, whatever, oh, okay, really interesting. Well, we've got a lot of people that have different belief systems, and you're going to find people that believe differently than you. It might be the totally opposite of what you believe, but I need you to be professional and realize, and I've told everybody the same spiel, you need to be a grown-up, you need to be civil and mature, and realize that if somebody disagrees with what you believe, that's okay. They don't pay your bills. Uncle Sam pays your paycheck. So be able to look and understand and have somebody share with what they believe, and you can share back, but don't be a dick about it, and don't be a jerk and belittle somebody because of what they believe, if they hold that belief to be true in their hearts, and that's something that they follow, even if it's 100% wrong. What is it, the Church of Elvis? Let's just take that for an example. Somebody believes in the Church of Elvis, Elvis is God, blah, 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 the whole nine yards, and they truly believe that this is what gives them the thing they need to get through the day, and they share it with other people. That seems pretty ludicrous to me, probably for a lot of people. But I wouldn't belittle that person because that helps them do their job. I'm concerned about the mission. I'm concerned about getting the job done, and I'm concerned about giving my guys and gals the most of the time off as possible. Taking care of them, making sure that they got food, the house, cars. Oh, you're broke down. I'll come give you a ride into work. We'll get it figured out. We'll do donations. From the section to try to get some tires. For you, whatever. We would find ways to take care of our people. So, with that, we never had anybody not rise to that. So that's why we had so many people, and we had people with alternate lifestyles as well. And it's like, hey, that's not how I roll, obviously, because I'm married, and maybe there's even married guys that roll that way. I don't know. Probably there are these days. But the people that had alternate lifestyles totally understand that. And they were like, wow, I'm so glad to hear that, because I was really worried about that. And it's like, no, you don't got nothing to worry about. Whatever you do on your own time is on your own time. We had more arguments over sports teams than we did religion and lifestyle during my time in the military. It would be over comic books. It would be over playing spades. It would be, pagan, atheist, Christian, Muslim, and then just, agnostic. We're all around playing spades or bones or whatever it is. Like, we get more into arguments over that stuff. And sports teams, oh man, we would get into sometimes some drag down fights when it came to sports teams. But everything else, everybody was cool with. So, hey, it is what it is. Let's see, we got, Fairtha says, I agree with you on that, but I also believe that this is not going to apply to everyone. It's so hard to make blanket statements. Yeah, it absolutely is. It absolutely is. And I think that's why it's important, at least what I learned so far, and especially during my time in the military, is to take everybody as an individual. If you can deal with somebody on an individual level and look past, say, hey, and that's how I was raised in the military. Hell, that's how I was raised. The military did the raising for me because my family was so dysfunctional. So when it got to the point of where it's like, hey, deal with everybody on a one-on-one basis. Because you don't know what they're going through. You can make assumptions, and that'll make an ass out of you or me. You ever hear that little saying? So, the people that raised me up and were leaders to me in the military put forth these things, and I just carried it on. And so, yeah, it's, you're going to make blanket statements, oh, Dallas Cowboys, we know about those people, or the name making fun of different service branches, the Navy and all of that. There's ribbing and stuff like that. But when it gets down to it, to do the job, it doesn't matter. Take everybody on an individual level, assess their strengths and weaknesses, and work on developing them to be the best person that they can be. And that was my job as a leader in the military, because that's what people did for me, because I was clueless when I came in. I didn't have that. So let's see. Would love to hear these stories over a drink. Sounds like good times. Yeah, there's a lot of good times, and there was a lot of drinking in the military. So it was just kind of wild stuff. But, the people that worked for me, I can count on one hand the number of people, -2, that really were problem children, and that pressed the issue because, and whether it's because of their orientation or whatever it was, they made that their whole identity. And they wouldn't do their job, and they said, well, you can't do anything to me because I'm this or that or whatever. And it's like, no, I told you to empty the Connex and to straighten this and inventory that, and you didn't do it. That has nothing to do with your skin color. It has nothing to do with your sexual orientation. It doesn't have, you pray 5 times a day. Great. You had the whole day to do something that would take 4 hours and you didn't do it. So I'm just saying it's not about that. So stop making it about that, because it's not. You're just lazy. You didn't do the work. And now you're trying to pull this card and play it as a trump card, and it's not working. It's not the big spade. I hold the big spade card, and boom, you're done. And then comes counseling and all of that stuff in the military. Trying to get these people. And like I said, there was three only three in my entire 20 plus year career of people that were acting a fool and trying to make it, well, you're only giving me a negative counseling statement because I'm gay. And that was one of them. And it's like, no. You know, if we look back here, you were late on all of these days to formation, and every time I told you were late, we did counseling, on weekly counseling on the number of days that you were late. You didn't have an excuse for why you were late other than, you know, oh, I got up late. Oh, I had problems getting into work. Oh, what problems did you have getting into work? Oh, you know, obviously no problems because they drove to work fine and they drove home fine. So, it's just, you have some people that will do that will try to make an excuse and use that thing, the race, their identity, their orientation, whatever it is, as an excuse of why they didn't do the job they were assigned to do. And like I said, there was only three of those. So, you know, everybody else, hundreds and hundreds? Crazy. In 20 years, how many people have I been involved with? How many people did I work with and supervise? And I made it up to sergeant first class, and I was platoon sergeant. Crazy. Exactly. Stay focused, no worries. Yep, exactly. Tito George's Travel said, did you work at Camp Humphreys or Osan? Actually, I worked at Camp Humphreys, and I did that for a while. It ends up, actually, when I got to Korea my first time, was at Camp Page in 1988, just prior to the Olympics. I worked 2 years up there, and then I came down to Camp Humphreys because the land of the big PX, and I couldn't get a job in Seoul. But I liked Humphreys much better, and so I came and worked down at Camp Humphreys for a number of years, and then that's where my wife and I met, and then, yeah, we've been together for 35 years. She's awesome. So, yeah, it was fun stuff. Let's see, Ferrithus says, laugh out loud, that's not just the military. I had people like that too. The whole HR investigations, because of this stuff, total waste of time. And usually that's what it comes down to. You know, either you do your job or you don't. Now, I would be remiss if I didn't say that I saw things in the military where people were outrightly racist, that were outrightly discriminate against people of their orientation or their religion or, you know, stuff like that. I have seen that, but it's rare. And it was rare because, like I said, I joined in the 80s, I retired in 2005, and so there was a lot of stuff that went through there. And yeah, but those instances were rare. And, you know, people talk about the good old boy system. I didn't, you know, maybe I saw that a few times in the military, but thankfully during my time in the military, it was more focused on doing the job, getting the job done, and that was it. You know, so, you know, it was rare to see somebody that would discriminate against people or that would play the good old boy system. I've seen it a few times. But then there's something to be said for, you know, you do a job and you do it good and you're in this platoon and you're part of this company or whatever, and then you're being hired, but that person was from this company, so is there some nepotism there? I don't know, maybe a little bit, but yeah. It you know, it is what it is, but for the most part, the majority, people were people, and we didn't really care because we just wanted to get the job done and have time off. So, yeah. Tito says, I was at Pilsung in Hump. I remember Page. Yeah, Pilsung. I don't remember where that's at. And he also says, at Camp Long. Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, I also spent time up at Camp Gary Owen, and if you remember, it used to be called Camp Pelham, but then Gary Owen, or vice versa, or whatever it is, actually went up there, and it's all gone. Yeah, everything was turned over to the South Koreans. Camp Page was turned over to South Korea. We actually took a trip up there because I thought, hey, it'd be kind of cool to go back and see how it's gone. Like, there's like a fence around it because they were going to level it and all this stuff, but there was some environmental concerns because the Koreans and Americans would, both the Korean military and the U.S. military would dump oil and all kinds of bad stuff into the drains, and then So there's that. The cleanup on that is just insane. And then what compounded it and made it even worse is that there was agricultural or archaeological findings up in that area. But then they couldn't dig that because of the environmental concerns of all of that. So it's just kind of flattened and fenced off. And yeah, it's Camp Page is done. I remember some terrain features and stuff like that. It's like, oh, I remember that hill. We used to run up that hill. But yeah, that's fun stuff. But also spent time, used to go down to TDC, Tongjinshan, and Camp Casey. Let's see, what were some of the other places? Used to go pick up ComSec and some classified materials. I do runs for that stuff down at, it was above, I can't remember the name of it. It was close to the prison that was up north. And I can't remember the name of it. But anyway, yeah. And then, of course, being in a military police unit, also went down to Taegu, with the 8th MP Brigade down there, would do some work down there. And, of course, Camp Humphreys and some other places. Actually ended up training MPs on communications and other stuff. For FM radios, Singar's radio, which is a single channel ground airborne radio system that frequency hopped 500 frequencies per second, anti-jam, all that stuff. Pretty amazing stuff. So yeah, I got to see a lot of Korea. Worked on Korean military bases, number of exercises. Yeah, it was pretty fun. Multi-purpose range complex up north. Pilsung Range was the bombing range. Oh, okay. Pilsung Range. Let me look that up. Pilsung Range. Pilsung is the embodiment of Pilsung Range, South Korea. Dun, 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 Pilsung Range. Military training area in South Korea, jointly operated by the U.S. Air Force and the Korean Air Force, located in Gwangwon Province near Mount Taebaksong. Oh, okay, alrighty, I know where you're talking about. Most of the time, MPRC, Korea, the multi-purpose range complex, Area 1, and yeah, we would go there a lot. Let's see if this will pop up. Oh yeah, there it is, boom! MPRC, so it would be all up against that. They'd be firing, and you got the complex down here. We would do tank and aerial gunneries because we were part of a CAV unit. And yeah, 2nd Infantry Division was there. Yeah, kind of amazing stuff. Of course, that's not it, but that's it there. That was some really cool stuff. Had some fun times there. Terry ends up saying, hey, I was at Gwangju Air Base in Camp Red Cloud. Yeah, Camp Red Cloud. Yeah, cool. A lot of vets on here. So, yeah, a lot of traveling around, especially during Team Spirit back in the day. If you were stationed here in Korea, then you go and do your Team Spirit. A bunch of units come to Korea, and then you just kind of travel around and have all kinds of fun and stuff. Yeah, it was a lot of fun there. And MPRC, matter of fact, was the range where that's where the guy got his head blown off. They were doing. We were just coming in. I was part of the advanced party, and we were coming in, and the unit, another unit, was still there. They were still doing their gunneries, and they had armored vehicles coming up, and then you had soldiers coming out of the tracked vehicles and going forward, and then you have the guy with the 50 on top, and they were shooting and all this stuff, and it ends up somebody screwed the pooch, and a guy took a 50 cal round to his head, and boom, it was gone. And they, of course, they shut down their range real quick. Yeah, that was horrid. Absolutely crazy. It was just, I mean, the guy never felt it, obviously. It just, obliterated him. So, yeah, that was dark. That was a rough day. Yeah, that was a rough one. So we had actually gone, and we were up in the tower because we were looking at, how the tower was going. It had grounding problems in the tower, and so if you hook certain things up, you'd get shocked, and so we had to run separate ground wires from our communications equipment down to the ground and grounded because it was horrible there. So yeah, we got there early to see what was going on, and we were actually up in the tower when that happened, and it was just, yeah, that was a rough day. But yeah, a lot of stuff. So yeah, indeed, the military service in Yongsan, Humphreys, KC, K-16 in Busan was an enjoyable experience. It was a period one can fondly reminisce about. Oh yes. I remember trying to go down to Yongsan, and we go down to Itaewon. Being at Camp Page or even being at Garryowen, we would take the train and come down to Itaewon and go to Yongsan, and get a pizza and all that, and then we go hit Itaewon and go drink and have some fun. So yeah, fun stuff. I don't have many contact points with military. I do work with a lot of Navy veterans though. Okay, that works. I'm all for that. You're in the group. You're in the club. I'm totally fine with that. Billy Mack comes on and says, "Hey, Steve, I was stationed at 8th Army HQ in Yongsan in the early 80s. Itaewon was our ville." I remember that. I remember the racism was very mild with the exception of a few idiots. Yeah, it's always the few idiots. Yeah, there's always the few, the proud. Not the Marines, but the idiots. But we did have some pretty interesting times when the Marines would come to Korea for Team Spirit. They thought they would be able to drink us up under the table, and it was like, oh, we love Team Spirit. We love Team Spirit, especially when you get the reserve or Army units, reserve units would come, and then they think, oh, because you drink a 6-pack after work that you can drink. Hey, I got this little drink you might want to try. It's called soju. Let's try that. Oh, that ain't nothing. It's like, just wait. And they would get hammered. Yeah, the damage we did to our livers when we were younger in the military was just scary. I'm glad I'm healthy now. I'm surprised that I'm as healthy as I am, considering all the alcohol that I drank. Which, as you get older, you start looking and you realize that kidney disease, about a third of people are going to get kidney disease, and in some way, shape, or form. And then it's like you look back at what you did to your kidneys, and you're like, why? What was I thinking? Drinking, get drunk, throw up, get sober again, drink more. I mean, it was just blackouts. There's days where I don't remember days. Being down in Itaewon, it is just, or out in the Ville or whatever, it's absolutely insane. But we worked hard and we played hard. So anyway, with that, I'm getting hungry. It's about 10 a.m. in the morning here. Billy says, I second that one. Yeah, don't want to do it again, especially now that I'm old. It's like, I don't see how people could do that. And Terry brings up the one and only, I remember the days of Jungle Juice. Oh, yes. Remember the big Tupperware bowls, and then they would get the champagne, the Korean champagne. They pour that in there, and then they pour a couple bottles of soju in there, and then they pour this and that, throw in some ice and, all kinds of other stuff. And then, yeah, you drink that, and it would just, you'd get hammered. Of course, it tastes sweet. You can't taste the alcohol because soju, it was masked by the fruit and, the champagne and the sweetness of everything that was in there. So you could drink a whole bowl and be like, hey, I feel fine. And then you stand up and you're like, and you were done. So many days of carrying people back, navigating the turtle ditches and seeing people in turtle ditches that were passed out, especially the reserve people and the people that came over for Team Spirit and Ulchi Focus Lads. That was another big exercise. Love seeing those people just getting trashed and hammered. They couldn't handle their liquor. They thought they could drink us under the table. It's like, oh yeah, you can really drink a lot. Hey, try this thing. It's jungle juice. Just try. Yeah, it's not bad at all. It's just we're kind of lightweight, so we just kind of drink the jungle juice, and they're like, hey. Then that would be the end of them. We'd lure them in and trap them. I would love to work on some new tech. Always fascinating when a colleague tells me how he worked on these insane radar systems for the Air Force. Amazing technology. Yeah. And the cool thing, I got to work with the Air Force a little bit we would do joint missions. Worked with the Air Force on some stuff a couple of times. The really cool stuff is working with the Navy. So I was actually part of a team that would go on a Navy ship, and we were the only Army people there, and we got our guns and rifles and pistols and whatever, and we would do joint missions between the Navy, the Air Force, and the Army off of the west coast of Korea, and pretty amazing stuff. Yeah, the technology, but even then, every service had some great technology. We had the Singars radios that would frequency hop. So you have one radio here and one radio here. Usually you operate off of one frequency. But the problem is that can be jammed if somebody dials into that frequency and then sends out a signal that is more powerful than the sending and receiving units. So you would block that frequency, you would block communications, which is not a good thing in war or training. But with the Singars radio, excuse me, what they'd end up doing, and this was way back from Hedley Lamar, way back in the day, and she actually came up with frequency hopping, is that at specific times and sequences, the frequency would jump from one frequency to another, and it got so fast that it was up to 500 frequencies per second. And so even if you jammed 40 or 50% of the frequency spectrum, you would still be able to talk to that distant station. They would still be able to talk to you. So the whole idea of Singars was anti-jamming, and of course, it would minimize the chances of being found out with direction finding equipment, which is pretty amazing. And that was back then. I couldn't imagine what they have now. But yeah, amazing tech that they have. But what was interesting, the Navy had their own tech, and trying to get the Navy and the Army and the Air Force to all talk to each other at times, wow, sometimes that was crazy. So kind of like when you have, excuse me, so sometimes when you have, say like a natural disaster, a man-made disaster, fires or earthquakes or whatever it is, and then you have you have emergency services, you have medical, police, sheriffs, FBI, whatever it is, all these different agencies, fire department coming together. They often couldn't talk to themselves because they had different equipment, they had different frequencies, and so on and so forth. And so really there was a lot of confusion when all of these agencies came together during a time of an emergency. And we found that out during the time in the military, but then it also got to the point of where it kind of morphed into, well, if we ever have to work together, we have designated frequencies that are available to all of the emergency services, and kind of like in the military indeed, that you would know that, hey, if the balloon goes up and stuff pops off, we need to communicate with the Army, the Marines, the Air Force, our counterparts here in Korea or wherever we were, that you would have those designated frequencies, and then during those training exercises that you wouldn't lose that communication. So yeah, very, very good stuff. Terry Lay says, I was a power plant operator at PAV-PAWS radar site south of San Angelo, Texas. Wow. I got a story about radar equipment. Maybe we'll get into that. I don't know. Let's see. Indeed, I was engaged in discussions on pertinent topics, particularly those related to technology. During my tenure in the military, I was employed in the IT sector. Oh yeah, so you probably saw some pretty cool stuff as well. Yeah, kind of amazing. Interesting note. Here is something that I don't think I'll get in trouble anymore because the statute of limitations is far gone. But Terry brought up radar site. When I was going through AIT, it ends up, I went to Fort Sill, Oklahoma for communications training. They moved it from Fort Gordon to Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and which Oklahoma, Fort Sill, is the home to artillery. King of Battle, or Queen of Battle, or whatever it is, whatever the card was. King of Battle, artillery. Interesting note is we were often tasked to do things while we're waiting for a class to start. So we got there early, and it's like, okay, so we're waiting. We had like 3 weeks or so, whatever it was, because we missed a class, and so they had us wait, and we would go in the next class. So they would have us do details, We'd report in the morning after breakfast. They'd send us on a detail, and if it was picking up trash and then we're done for the day. One of the times during this is they got a bunch of us. It was just before we started class, and they brought us into this big building, and there's tons of boxes. And it was like, hey, we need to shred all these documents, and then shred the documents, and then they would take them to a burn pit or burn barrel. They were going to burn them or whatever. But we had to shred all these documents. And supposedly they were going to take them and get them burned as well. But as we're shredding these documents, I mean, it's like a huge, giant room, boxes and boxes and boxes of nothing but military files. And these things were kind of classified files, kind of had some things on the top of them in red that indicated that they were important files at one time in some way, shape, or form. The interesting thing is, I specifically saw documents how the United States sold radar technology and sent radar equipment to China during the time of Nixon. Remember when China was the bad people and the whole thing, and China and the U.S. back then, Nixon during those times, all of the saber rattling. We saw lading documents of radar equipment that was shipped to China. China. And we're shredding these documents. There's some other interesting stuff too. I mean, but back then we didn't know anything. We had just got out of basic training. We didn't know about classification. Hey, look, it says secret. Hey, it looks classified. Looks this, that, FOUOA, whatever. For official use only, and it's like we're just sitting there with shredders. And you're looking over these papers. It's like, holy crap! Did you see this? That's China. That's radar equipment. Yeah, oh well, hurry up. The sooner we get done, we get off. So, but that was a multi-day thing. That was kind of like we were shredding and shredding and shredding and shredding. And nobody else was there. It's like they dropped us off in this room with these classified documents saying, hey, shred all this stuff, put it in the bags, put the bags over here, we'll take care of that later. I don't remember ever seeing anybody like ComSec qualified, ComSec custodian, communications security. I actually was a ComSec security custodian, ComSec custodian, where I ran a couple of times vaults and things like that for classified information and radios and codes and this and that and all that kind of fun stuff. I did all that. But yeah, I didn't know. And I just thought shredding documents, shred documents. The sooner we get done, the sooner we can get off. But this room was filled. So they would have us go in shifts and stuff like that. It was just during the day, not during the night. But yeah, crazy stuff. Yeah, but I remember that clear as day. That was like, just pages and pages of stuff. Chinese address, China, Republic of China, blah, blah, blah. And this was, back in the 70s. I can't remember the date, but yeah, I think it was in the 70s and stuff. It was like tons of stuff. Absolutely insane. Let's see. Feritha says, I'm an optics guy. Big thing for me right now is the new photon multiplier tech they have, night vision. Yeah, night vision has gone leaps and bounds. I remember the first night vision that I got to look through, and it was just everything's green, and it was so one-dimensional. And can you imagine walking around in that? And it's hard to get depth perception. You're walking into trees and holes and whatever. Driving, with night vision devices and all that stuff. But now they end up, the night vision they have, with the 4 things in the helmet. I got to look through one of those once. That was insane. But now they've got, have you seen the cameras that in pitch dark you can see colors? It's like taking a video during the day. Granted, it's just a little bit darker. But that is insane on this stuff. And this is some stuff that is available to civilians today. So yeah, crazy amount of stuff that they have. Just insane. I don't know. Wild stuff. And then you got AI and all this stuff. What is it, Grok 4 that came out, and it ends up now supposedly Grok, which is Elon Musk's AI thing, is I think they said it was is it as intelligent as graduate students, people who who are graduate students and graduated in all areas, and so now AI is getting super smart. And then he was saying or indicating that maybe this year, but definitely next year, that is going to be able to do things that people cannot do in regards to thinking. It's just, this is going to be huge. AI is going to be huge. Which, how does that work with military and everything else? That's just, that's what I'm talking about. For me, I want to look up these. Look up in these, be able to see the galaxies in your own eyes. We thought that was the coolest thing. I remember, with the night vision goggles, you're out in the sticks somewhere, and then you look up and you see all the stars. That was incredible. I always just kind of love that kind of stuff. So, fun stuff. Well, I think we rambled on a little bit more than racism in Korea. Does it affect me as a foreigner? I think we'll close this out. As it is now, no, not really. I don't go clubbing. I don't do that stuff anymore. And I do think that Korea needs to get some laws on the books in regards to this type of stuff. Because there are problems in Korea with this, just like there's problems everywhere else. But I think Korea is a little slow on the uptake on this, but they're working towards that. It's just not working as fast as a lot of people would like, especially being a developed nation as Korea is. So, but on a day-to-day basis, no, I don't have any problems. Wife doesn't have any problems. But then again, we don't go to clubs, and we just have normal lives. So, there it is. That's it. That's all I got, folks. So anyway, we'll close this out, and we'll bid you all adieu. Please like and subscribe to the channel. I would really appreciate that. If you don't do that, what hope is there for me? So please like and subscribe. If you want to contact me, there's the email address. I 100% answer all of my emails. Might take a few days. So if you just want to say hi, or interested about Korea or hobbies or the stuff that I do, whatever, there's that. If you want to do me a solid, like all these people on the scrolling ticker who bought me coffee, there's a link for that in the description box as well. There's Terry Lay, there's Mike H, there's a number of other people. Thank you all for being so awesome. I appreciate that. Billy Mack, we're going to close out with him. Take care, and we will see you on the next video. Peace. Good stuff.